This episode of the Move Mind podcast was brought to you by CBD Mountain, the sport and fitness CBD. Head over to cbdmountain.com for a range of soft gels, skin balms, oils and vapes, and purchase online and have the premium quality CBD delivered directly to your door. cbdmountain.com. Thanks for tuning in to the Move Mind podcast. My guest today is Dr. Jon Amato, an experienced strength coach, former teacher of physical education at the NYC Department of Education, and holder of a Doctorate of Physical Therapy from Mercy College. We begin our conversation around the idea of physical education. Why is having one so damn important, regardless if you consider yourself to be a physical type of person or not?
Especially here in the US, physical education is actually pushed aside quite a bit. So when it comes to cutting programs, comes to cutting activities and funding for schools, it's one of the first ones to go. So it's unfortunate that we seem to treat it as an ancillary to education, where I believe more so that using your physical body and encompass yourself in fitness and kind of just learning where your body is in space, especially at a young age, actually would help progress traditional educational settings. So let's say, for example, my youngest son is 3 years old. If he is not able to expend any of his energy that he's got pent up in that little 3-year-old body, he can't possibly sit still for 20, 30, 40 minutes and pay attention for even just something as simple as, coloring within the lines, let alone some kid who's in 5th grade, who's got maybe some attention deficit disorder or other mood disorders. And he's got this pent up energy and he has to be able to use it. And they're expected to sit there for 6+ hours a day quietly and pay attention and partake. So in the US, traditionally, the physical education class is one of your 8 periods, which is roughly 45 minutes, which I don't think is enough. I think it should be at least a 90-minute session for kids, especially those that don't partake in after school sports or any kind of after school club activities. But it's from an early age, from kindergarten, really just here in the US, we teach them how to use their body in space, just explore movement in general. And then from there, we might progress into actual sport, organized sport, and going to different rules and regulations in different sport to introduce the kids to the different potential sports there are, and then maybe guide them towards an avenue to an after school sport or something, or another activity that they could do outside of regular class, something to help assist them in potentially getting into college or something like that.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I like the idea of educating kids around how to use their body in space. I think that's an important kind of angle to teach. I think it can be taught, maybe through games, maybe through play.
Exactly. It doesn't have to be traditional, do this 10 reps, do this, move over here. It could just be something as simple as organized free play, where the general idea is to jump up and over underneath certain objects, or like an obstacle course type setting where the kids are exploring what it's like to crawl on all fours, to jump, to run, to hang off of something, to pull themselves up and use muscles they don't normally use in their day-to-day life.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, obstacle course style, Takeshi's Castle, that kind of thing. It just brings it out of kids, doesn't it? You only have to drop them in a play area like that, and they'll find their route, they'll find their pathway, and they'll find their play.
Sure, and you have the variants, right? You have the kids that are interested, but they'll kind of dip their toes in, as it were, and the other kids who go in, full tilt without even batting an eye, and they're ready to take on whatever's in front of them. So as a physical educator, you kind of have to adapt for all bodies in the room. So you can't expect every kid to partake fully. You can't expect every kid to sit back a little bit and just watch. So you have to kind of prepare yourself for that and have all potential outcomes ready.
Yeah, absolutely. Your physical education, did it have a large emphasis on the academic side of sort of the theory, or did it have an in the trenches component, or a bit of both?
It was both. So it was a 4-year degree. I got mine from SUNY College, Cortland of New York, State College, Cortland, New York. The first 2 years are your basic gen ed stuff. So everybody's got to take your basic sciences, your basic social histories, your basic socioeconomics. And then from there, it branches out. We go into more in-depth sciences. So we go into kinesiology, biomechanics, and human anatomy. And then from there, it goes into more the in the trenches stuff. Here's how to teach soccer for K through 6, soccer from 6 through 12, football, baseball, basketball, hockey, when I was coming up I graduated in 2003 from SUNY Cortland. So when I was coming up, this project adventure thing was big. They were trying to get away from traditional PE, where it was very sport oriented, to get more kids involved. It was more like trust games, more things like obstacle courses, things like using your mind to figure out a maze, or orienteering, or group related activities where the strengths of each individual could play into the group to succeeding in whatever the task was. I don't think it really took off, but I don't know for sure because I only taught for a total of 5 years before I kind of left and switched careers. But when I got into full-time teaching the New York City Board of Ed, that wasn't even an option. The New York City Board of Ed is usually a little further behind the track than everybody else, either due to funding or resources or whatever it is. I mean, the school I taught in when I first got there, all they had was a couple of basketballs. So I spent my first couple of paychecks buying some stuff for the kids, and which in the end ended up getting stolen from people that were in and out of the school randomly. So I essentially only really ever had basketballs. That's what it boiled down to. We had no outdoor space. We were just indoors because, we were in the inner city part of Brooklyn. So you're pretty limited in what you can do.
Yeah, blimey. In terms of testing your versatility and adaptation sort of mindset, that's quite trying. What could you come up with? Well, I suppose you could come up with lots of stuff with just basketballs, couldn't you? Because you have to, like you're forced to, I suppose. Yeah. But is that suboptimal? Maybe, I'm not sure.
It depends. So it also depends on I ran into some trouble with some of the kids didn't want to do anything other than basketball. So I tried to introduce ultimate frisbee, which was a $3 frisbee was the only piece of equipment I needed. Half the class kind of took to it, and the other half wanted nothing to do with it. I tried introducing touch rugby. I was big into rugby at that time. Some of the kids liked it, some didn't. And then after that, we didn't have any resources for floor hockey or anything else. So it was games I can come up with minimal resources, like you said. I know at the time, dodgeball was kind of outlawed in physical education here in the States. It was like a big no-no. But I created my own version of the game, which involved basketballs and a couple of the softer playground balls we had, and some bowling pins that were laying around in the back closet. So the kids got to shoot a basket from half court. Their whole team got to come back in if they made it. And then if they knocked a pin down with a playground ball, one teammate got to come back in if they knocked it down, or if they caught a ball, some kind of the traditional dodgeball rules. But it didn't. I had like maybe 4 or 5 playground balls, like 6 bowling pins, and a couple basketballs. I was able to have a full class with that with the kids. I remember it was like my first year teaching, and I kind of brought that in, and the assistant principal comes in, and I thought I was I thought I was in big trouble because now I was to be doing that kind of stuff because dodgeball is considered degrading. Some of the kids are out, or they're hit with the ball in front of the rest of their class. The kids are laughing. So it's, at the time, the New York City Board of Ed was a bit more of the Wild West, so things were more allowed there than other places. But I thought I was going to get yelled at. He pulled me aside and he said, can I play? So it was like him on one side and me on the other, and it became a big thing. We had tournaments in the school, and it was pretty cool.
Amazing. Well, props to you for taking literally the balls to go and do something like that. Yeah, that's awesome. No, I can appreciate that courage. There's a couple of interesting researchers that have some stuff to say about physical education that maybe I could drop in some quotes here. So there was a chap, this guy is supposed to be the father of the Department of Physical Ed at West Point in New York, Herman Kohler.
And name sounds familiar.
Yeah, the 1920s was kind of his thing. He was an American football coach, athletics administrator, and an army officer, basically, for the US Army. And he believed that mechanical proficiency through physical training is essential for self-reliance, courage, and personal discipline. That basically physical education is essential for those things. And he argued that the discipline of the individual determines the discipline of the masses. Is it fair to say that physical education ultimately can teach kids, adults, whoever, to be kind of more self-reliant and disciplined? If they is that possible to glean that from a physical education, do you think?
I'm a bit biased, but yeah, I think so. Just because sports and physical fitness has been a big part of my life since I'm in grade school. It taught me, sports and physical fitness taught me a lot about myself growing up and about those around me and the world that I was a part of. But, I think the word physical education could be a broad term for more like physical fitness, right? Once we get older, it becomes more of a fitness journey, or whether you try to become a strongman or you're a distance runner or you're whatever it is. But I think the roots to that are grounded when you're a kid and introduced to all that stuff. And if you don't ever have that experience, you might be less likely to partake in a lifelong fitness endeavor.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, I think, yeah, I agree with that. I was introduced to games and stuff early, sports, and rugby, funnily enough, which I know you played for a while, 8 years at the Old Blue team over there in the States. Now, with regards to collision and combat sports, John, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about this idea of resilience, pretty important, arguably, physical attribute for collision and combat sports athletes. Could we unpack a little bit, perhaps, what is resilience in that context? Why is it useful? And how would you go about creating it with your strength coaching and sort of physio background if it's currently lacking in a combat or collision sport athlete?
Yeah, I guess there's the one of the two are kind of interchangeable, right? So collision sports and combat sports are kind of one of the same. It's a different style of collision. One, you're using your entire body as a weapon, and the other, it's a foot or a hand or whatever it is, an elbow. I do think that it takes a certain individual to either step on the pitch for rugby or a football field, or step in the cage or the ring. It's a certain kind of person that is willing to put themselves through certain amounts of physical discomfort in order to achieve a goal, let's say. It's not for everyone, that's for sure. I've seen plenty of people come on and off the mats in jiu-jitsu that, they try it for a week or two and they don't like it. I've had more than my share of teammates come and go over the years with football and rugby. Guys that thought they were big and tough, and once they had ball in hand and got drilled by a 280-pound Samoan, and decided it really wasn't for them anymore, but with no pads on. But like I said, it takes a certain kind of individual, and like you said, resilience is a big key, and I don't think that's something you can teach per se. You either have it or you don't, and I think it brings to light kind of their own indomitable will, if they're willing to take that physical punishment over and over as a learning process. If you're just starting out in boxing or just starting out in jiu-jitsu, the first few months of each one of those are grueling. All you're doing is getting your ass kicked for hours on end, but eventually something clicks. And if you're willing to stick it out to see how you come through in the end, I think that's where the little golden nugget is. Then you start to see who you are as a person, who you are as an athlete, how much you can endure, not just in the sport itself, but maybe through the rest of life. Can you take on the highs and lows of life, with whether it's, financially or it's emotionally or it's health issues with someone in yourself or someone in your family. I just think you being able to stick through that in the contact sports sense, it makes it more viable for you to do that in the rest of your life.
Yeah, 100%. I agree with that. Yeah, it's almost like you could synthesize the idea of adversity onto a pitch or into a cage, and hopefully that's going to leak sort of by osmosis into your daily life, and you've got that strength to carry over, that resilience to carry over to life's trials and tribulations.
Yeah, 100%. And like I said, it takes a certain individual to seek that out first, and then those that stick it out through the end, those are the ones that I've noticed through my life with guys I've played with that are some of the more interesting individuals. They're the ones that are willing to take the most risk with their careers, the ones that are willing to take the most risk with financial endeavors, the ones that are willing to try new things, whether it's, a new sport, a new activity, if it's a new career. Some of the guys I got to play with at Old Blue are very successful, whether they're lawyers, orthopedic surgeons, doctors, dentists. But there's that certain level of crazy that they have that I think that allows them to not only play the sport that we all love so much, but then to pursue whatever they want to do with reckless abandon that made them so successful.
Yeah, it carries through. It's a core sort of, it's in their essence, isn't it? In their sort of personality. So resilience then is kind of, in that context, we could say it's almost like it's a mental trait, or it's like a willpower related trait.
100%. Yeah.
On the physical realm of resilience, so literally like the corporal realm of a body being resilient, how could you go about making somebody more resilient in the gym, in the squat rack, under the barbell, so that when they go and do their sport, they don't just crumple under that big tackle or, the body kick or whatever it is? Do you have a kind of approach that you use in terms of, I'm thinking along the lines of, like absolute strength or relative strength that you go down in terms of making the body as resilient as perhaps their minds might already be?
Sure. With all sport, there's the inherent risk of potential injury, right? And the biggest fear in the majority of contact sports are like kind of the ligament strains or sprains or tears, the muscle strains or sprains or tears. But ultimately, in the end, it's, the stronger you can make the body, the less likely that is. Now, whether that's if you add 5 to 6 to 10 pounds of muscle on an individual, can they create more force in the contact? Sure. But not only that, they're also making that the muscles surrounding their joints provide more protection, so that when there is that quick change of direction, when there is that unforeseen force you didn't see, you're less likely to sustain one of those catastrophic injuries. Now, you're not guaranteed, of course, and we saw something like that just this past weekend with Chris Weidman. He's been fighting for years and throws the very first strike of the entire fight, and he breaks both his tib and fib in what ended up being a compound fracture, because when he stepped back on what now was his leg on the ground instead of his foot, the bone came through the muscle of the calf and the back of the leg and became a compound fracture. Now, that guy, I've had the honor of working with Chris, whether it's for physical therapy or for strength and conditioning stuff over the last couple of years. And there are very few people that are as resilient as him. He's had his fair share of injuries over the years, multiple neck surgeries, knee surgeries, hand surgery. And yet he's one of the hardest workers in the room. Very humble dude, but tenacious as they come. So for him, just that's to show his kind of resilience, kind of circling back to what we're talking about resilience. Like, he was a very accomplished wrestler at Hofstra here on Long Island, a national American. He broke into the fight game kind of right after college type of deal, and he kind of climbed the ranks really quickly. But I said, with all that adversity he's had, he's been able to bounce back pretty quickly. Now, if someone like him wasn't as strong, if he didn't use weight training and strength and conditioning to kind of tune his body up, would he have seen more injury? And that kind of is my next point, is it has a lot to do with genetics, so you can be the strongest man in the weight room, but if your ligaments are just brittle, there's not a whole lot you're going to be able to do about it. You're going to tear your ACL, no matter how strong you get. You could squat 500 pounds or 135 pounds. If that ACL is going to go, it's going to go. My own injury, I had an ACL tear in my college years playing rugby, my junior year of college. And I was a pretty strong dude. I tried out for the football team, and I tested out. I squatted 500 pounds. I benched 300. I hang cleaned 275. And my ACL injury was the most unglamorous one you could possibly have. I just caught a pass from a teammate. I took a step into like a divot on the ground, and boom, there goes my ACL. So, ostensibly, being able to squat 500 pounds, you'd think that my ACL wouldn't go at all. But, genetically, it was just, I don't think it mattered what I would have done around that time in my life with all the sports I've played. It was probably going to go no matter what I was doing.
Yeah.
So to a point, you can shore up your body enough with strength and conditioning, but there's no way to account for the unforeseen obstacles that are involved in sport. So I don't think not training is the answer. Obviously, strength and conditioning is essential, and it's paramount to a lot of sport, and especially combat and contact sport, but it doesn't guarantee no injury. I think genetics play a huge role in that.
Yeah, that's very interesting. That's almost outside of your control, but you still got to go in the gym and do your work anyway. I think, you've got more experience than myself. I'm a little younger, but it seems that the trend is going, especially in collision and combat sport, that S&C is now a cornerstone of sport performance, whereas before it was perhaps maybe it wasn't maybe not even really a thing. It was maybe more about mental toughness, or just like the resilience in terms of willpower, but not necessarily. I think people like Tank Abbott come to mind, although I expect he could probably shift a lot of weight. But he looked like a kind of guy who just drank in a pub, and then went out and scrapped. Well, I expect he could probably still bench a shit ton, but
that's just it. He may have been in the gym and he may have been able to bench press a lot, but was it calculated? Was it actual programmable S&C stuff? Were there phases to it, macro and mesocycles? Probably not. He probably went into the bodybuilding workout twice a week, and then, like you said, hit the bag every now and then hit the pub.
Yeah.
So it's gotten much bigger, especially in combat sports. So I think in the last 5-ish years, S&C's become pretty huge at the higher level. And you'd be surprised. Some of the guys I work with now, prior to working with myself, or another one of my mentors in the S&C game here on Long Island is Tony Ricci. He's an unbelievable strength and conditioning coach and nutritionist. And then my colleague and friend at Bethpage Physical Therapy, Dr. Mike Camp, another great strength coach. These guys are working with some of these fighters, and before they come to us, they've never even really touched a weight before. So, and they're already at the highest level you can get. They're in the UFC, and like their idea of strength and conditioning is just doing some push-ups and sit-ups, before their cage work or their bag work. So, some of these guys are just being introduced to it now, and it's so like I said, it's still really growing in combat sports. But like you said, some of the top level guys, it's paramount to their training. Like they set aside a certain amount of time for their week. They have jujitsu these 3 days, boxing, S&C. And now rehab stuff or like prehab stuff is becoming a big role too. A lot of them are scheduling 1 day a week to kind of like get tune-ups and make sure nothing that's kind of a little niggling injury doesn't become a big injury.
Yeah.
So it's becoming bigger.
Yeah, it's definitely stuff like the UFC PI. I think bringing it into the limelight is helping. People are more aware of the term strength and conditioning now. But you're right, there are lots of people that still just think or have thought for years it's push-ups and sit-ups.
Yeah.
So if you're dealing with an athlete then who has a training age of 0, but they have the upper echelon of combat sports prowess by being in the UFC, it seems like that's quite a mismatch in terms of like a barbell age of 0 and yet almost a world champion level in combat. Where would you start even like an athlete like that on the continuum of getting, let's say stronger? Absolutely. I suppose you have to go right back to basics.
Yeah, and keep it simple, stupid, right? The KISS method. I kind of stick with that regardless of who I work with, whether it's some weekend warrior who wants to train twice a week or it's one of these high-level UFC guys. But it depends on how much time I have, right? So if they're just starting their 8-week camp, I'm not going to put them through a 4 to 6 week strength macro cycle. I don't have enough time for that. And they can't be sore for their jujitsu and their striking and the only other work they have to get done throughout the course of the week. So it becomes more like time under tension stuff to kind of simulate 5-minute rounds that they'd be in the cage, a lot of push, pull work, transitional movement, rotational work, core stability, but nothing that makes them so awfully sore that they can't move the next day. A lot of it has a big warm up, big mobility. So it's most of the guys. Let's break it down, right? So I have a guy who starts with me. He's just starting his 8-week camp for a fight. So I'm not going to do a straight up strength cycle with him. There's not enough time. So I'm going to find out what like you say, if their training age is 0, we might spend the first day or 2 together just going over basic form stuff for some basic movements, making sure they kind of understand, have a grasp on it. And a lot of them do, or if they don't, they catch it pretty quick. And then I cater their workouts to be, like I said, to mimic the amount of time they're in the cage. So it's like a 5-minute, like 8 exercise circuit. So they're push, pull, up, down, rotational work, anti-rotation, anti-extension, and then maybe like a burnout session towards the end. But it is a time under tension for total work for them, total work volume.
Yeah.
And then I'm monitoring heart rate variability. So I'm looking at where we start from week 1. If they go through the 5-minute circuit, are they peaking at 180, 190 beats a minute? And then for our 1.5-minute recovery, which mimics the minute they have in between rounds, is their heart rate coming down enough for them? And a lot of times when we're first starting off, no, they're getting like 155, and then we're cranking again, and they're going again for another 5 minutes. So, but as the weeks go on, you start to see they're cooling down. With that minute off, they're down to 130, they're down to 120, and some of them I'm getting down to 108 in that minute. So dropping from like max heart rate to 110. And then they're climbing back up again. So to me, that shows the increase in fitness. Obviously, that shows that they're actually recovering better. They're utilizing their oxygen systems. They're utilizing their glycogen levels faster and better than everybody else, or than they were when they started. So that works for them. Now we take the guy that comes to me and he's got 12 weeks, right? Or 20 weeks. Now I'm going to have a 4 to 6 week strength cycle, real basic, deadlift, bench, squat, pull. That's it. We're going to maybe and pull-ups, and those are going to be our bases with some ancillary work. And we'll start, my rep scheme for strength typically is either like the old school 5x5. I'll do a 4-6 maybe, and then 4-6 to 8 for those 8 weeks or so, those 4 to 6 weeks. And then from there, I'll do like a general strength test in the beginning, general strength test at the end, see if we were able to put on a good 15-20%. Because let's be honest, in 4 to 6 weeks, the first 3 or so, you got your neural adaptation. So they're going to get stronger regardless, just because of the more neural recruitment. And then you have the absolute strength from there for the next few weeks you have with actual work. So then we go into our 8-week cycle. And then from there, we're going to go into all the circuit type of stuff. So it all depends on how much time I have with them is really what it boils down to.
Yeah, that's critical, isn't it? So is it fair to say the closer you get to fight night, the more specific your training will look like to mimic the fight?
Very. In fact, I'll even start holding bags or pads for leg kicks and for punch work. And then we start doing, where it just becomes more, there's a lot less weight. There's a lot less, I'm very big into dumbbells and medicine balls and, tires and sledgehammers, but that's earlier on. As we get closer to like that fight week, it becomes body weight movement, more punching, lifting, carrying, stuff where it's going to mimic when they're in the cage, where it can kind of transfer over for them. Because at that point, again, I'm not really worried about them. We're just maintaining the strength we may have gotten in the beginning, making sure, now these guys are in their weight cut. They're dropping 10, 15 pounds at this point. So we can't have too much muscle because it's going to hinder their weight cut. And then you can't have burnout. You don't need injury this late. So it becomes more specific to the actual fight itself.
Yeah, absolutely. And in terms of benchmarks, John, I'm quite interested in this idea of benchmarks. If you are going to run a strength cycle, for example, because you do have that 20-week window and you can run 4 to 6 weeks at the beginning on a strength phase, how strong is strong enough for, let's say, a combat sports athlete? We're not trying to make them perhaps world powerlifters.
Right.
We're not trying to get them 1,000-pound squat. But at the same token, we don't want them to crumple under external load either. Do you have like a sort of a benchmark? I know it's probably on a case-by-case basis because it's not fair to say everyone needs to squat 500 pounds.
True.
Everyone's
different. Right. That's not going to happen.
But will you have like a benchmark in your mind with a specific athlete? Right, I'm going to try and get them in these 6 weeks. Let's aim for this. And then from there, we'll move into our specific stuff.
Yeah. And like you said, it's total production over time for me. So let's say I got an athlete like John Vellante. He's a heavyweight in the UFC right now. He could probably start off benching 250, no problem, right? Whereas I have the guy I'm working with now, he's the flyweight for the CFFC, Pumi Nkata. He weighs 130 pounds soaking wet. He's never going to bench 250, right? So it's an overall increase over time for me. So I like to see a 15% increase in strength in like a 4 to 6 week macro cycle. So if they go from day one, we're benching, let's say for Pumi, he's benching 135, and I don't do 1 rep max. I'm not doing that with these guys. It's not worth it. It isn't going to happen. It doesn't really carry over to the cage for them. For alignment in football, maybe that makes sense. It's one explosive movement and the play's over, but these guys are constantly moving. So I don't think that translates well. So I'll do either a 3 to 5 rep max calculation. And then from there, I'll extrapolate their 1 rep max.
Cool.
So my benchmarks, like I said, are squat, bench press, deadlift. And then if I can see like a 15% increase in force production or strength, then I think we had a good enough strength cycle before camp started. And we put on enough resilient strength for them to kind of move forward in camp.
Yeah, that's fantastic. No, I really like that approach. And then that 15% is applicable to anyone you've got in front
to
of
anyone.
you, right?
Yeah, anyone. Yeah. Like I said, if your max bench it was 100 and now you're benching 115, that's a 15% increase. If it was 300 before and now you're benching I can't do the math there, but 345, that was a 15% increase. So it's ideal, and it's applicable to everyone at any weight class and any sport really.
Yeah, fantastic. And will you typically get like a 2 times per week frequency in that 4 to 6 week window if you've got that 20-week total camp time? Are you trying to see those guys and girls twice a week to get that strength work done? Will that give you that 15% increase in theory?
So two is really not enough. If that were the case, in that strength cycle, I'd like to see them 4. I'd like to get 2 upper body days, 2 lower body days. But in reality, some of the guys that are coming up can't afford that. It's an hourly rate for a session. So they'll do an upper with me and a lower with me, and then I'll send them off with an upper and lower on their own. So they're getting 2 days on their own in when they can. And typically, in that time, they're still doing their jujitsu, they're still doing their striking, they're still doing their wrestling, but it's nowhere near as intense. So they might do like jujitsu once or twice that week, striking once or twice, and they'll hit strength training that 4 times, and it's not too much. Whereas in like a camp, they're doing 2 a days. It's jujitsu in the morning, striking at night, strength training in the morning, wrestling at night. And so you can't get anywhere near as much. And the breakdown that happens is just too much. Their body can't handle it.
Yeah, so that makes sense why you shift towards more body weight carrying, that kind of stuff, the closer you get to fight time. Yeah, because then the breakdown is just less. It makes sense because the total load is quite a lot in a camp. I can only imagine. Now, you're a unique chap, John, because you're what I call the triple trouble trifecta. You've got your physio, you've got your strength coaching, but you've also got your combat sports experience, your grappling, your striking, your MMA and all that mixed in. How did you come to the idea of wanting to get those kind of three? Like what came first, and where did you suddenly think, why I should blend these together? Because
All
that's a
right.
real cool combo in my
How
opinion.
much time you got?
I got time, brother.
So, all right. So, my journey's been, it's been long. Like I said, I've been involved in kind of health and fitness since I'm a kid. I was the fat little roly-poly kid who got picked on in 5th grade. And, my mom got me into wrestling and football as a way to kind of toughen me up a little bit. And I took to both, I liked them a lot, but wrestling seemed to click a bit more for me because there's a lot less, not there's less skill in wrestling, but in football, I was a lineman. That was it. There wasn't a lot of glory in there. At least wrestling, I had a chance of actually doing something on my own. And for me, wrestling was and is one of the ultimate sports, I think, for boys and girls, because it teaches humility. It teaches you to know who you are as a person, resilience, willpower if you have to cut weight. Um, you have to be humble because you can't blame anybody else for a loss. That kid didn't pass you the ball, or that guy didn't block the shot, or doesn't matter. You went out there and you lost because you got your ass beat, and that's it. You can't blame anybody else. So it teaches accountability more than anything else. And I think that's huge for kids now, because everyone wants to blame somebody else for something. No one wants to take accountability for anything. So you can't do that with wrestling. And then the same thing with individual combat sports too. But that's not really in the school setting here in New York, at least anyway. So wrestling is your closest bet for that. So fast forward, I go to college to get my PE degree. I'm teaching in Manhattan. I'm playing rugby for that Super League side in New York. Our sponsor was a physical therapy clinic / gym. They let us work out there for free. That was like the sponsorship we got from them. So I didn't have to pay for a gym membership, which was nice. And the owner one day had come up to me and he's like, what do you do for a living? He's like, I know rugby doesn't pay you all that, at all, which, we got like our flights and our hotel paid for, and like, meals when we went travel to like, LA or something like that for a game. But yeah, we didn't get paid, which is why I was still teaching at the time. He said, listen, you seem like you know what you're doing, here in the gym. He's like, I like your energy. He's like, why don't you go get your training license from the NSCA? So he insisted that I get my CSCS from the National Strength and Conditioning Association. This is back in 2005. So I got my CSCS. I barely qualified to take the test with a PE degree. There's certain qualifications in order to take that, to be able to sit for that test. Usually it's a kinesiologist or a strength training degree of some kind, but phys ed kind of fit in that qualification mold. So I barely squeaked in there. I took the test. So he goes, why don't you start working for me part-time? Be an aide to one of my therapists, a couple hours a week. I think you have something you could add here. So, I appreciate it. Thank you. So I started doing that, and I immediately loved helping people, people that were injured, getting them back to performance or back to sport. Now, I had a sort of biased experience because that particular clinic in Midtown, the owner himself was probably one of the best physical therapists. He was an athletic trainer prior to being a PT, but one of the best PTs in New York City. And he saw all sorts of movie stars, actors, singers, athletes when they were in town. So I got like this taste of like, what it's like to work with elite athletes and to see them go from, surgery where they're at their lowest to back to performing at like, the most elite level there is. And I was like, I want to do this. Like, I don't want to be a teacher anymore. And to be fair, if I had gotten a teaching job out in the suburbs, I'd probably still be a teacher. But in the city at the time, I think it's gotten a bit better now. I don't want to, bad talk the New York City Board of Ed at all. I'm sure they have lots of things going on for them, but it was where I happened to be in the school I was at. I ended up being a glorified babysitter. There was no subs in the school. So when a teacher was out, I got their kids on top of my 30 kids. So it was just a gym full of kids, making sure they didn't kill each other. And that wasn't what I went to school for. I couldn't really teach anything. I wasn't really helping anybody. I was just rolling out a couple basketballs. It was free play for 45 minutes, 6 periods a day. So I quit teaching and I worked for him full-time as his direct aide. I did that for about 6 years. And in that time, I got to personally oversee the S&C for a lot of these, a couple NFL players, a couple NHL guys, a couple MLB guys, from immediately post rehab to before they went off to their respective camps for their sport they were in. So now, I did that for a couple of years, and I said, well, I really like to do this myself. So my option, and I wanted to, my goal now was to own my own gym. Right now, gyms open and close daily. So I said, well, the business model they had there was actually brilliant because it was a gym that people could join as a membership, but it had the PT in it too. So it was sort of like a revolving door referral program. If you were there for PT because you got hurt and you happened to go there for PT and you want to join the gym, you got a discount rate because you were already a physical therapy patient. If you were working out and you got hurt there, you had PT right there. So it was kind of like people would kind of like round robin. It was like it would pay for itself as far as the gym, and the PT was paying. I was like, this is great. I want to do this. So I said, the only way I can do this is if I either go into business with somebody else, I'm the strength guy, and then that guy's the PT, or go back to school and get my own PT degree. So I went back to school. I did like a year and a half of prereqs and then 3.5 years of PT school. And that's what, so then now I got that taste of working with elite athletes. Now I'm married. My wife and I are buying a house out on Long Island. And, you know, there's not a lot of professional athletes that live out here. You know, there's not, you know, the pitcher for the Mets doesn't live middle Long Island. You know, nobody from the Jets lives out here. There's not like a big pool of professional athletes, but I knew that wrestling is a very big sport here. Section 11 and Section 8, which is Nassau and Suffolk County Wrestling, we produce a lot of high level wrestlers, a lot of state champions that end up going off to like Iowa and Ohio and Penn State. And I know that there's nowhere to go professionally after that. So the only way for that is then MMA. And Long Island is like a microcosm for MMA fighters. There's, I think, upwards of 12 active UFC fighters on Long Island right now. There are 4 people in PFL, 2 or 3 in Bellator, a lot of amateur level stuff. So if I wanted to work with professional athletes out here, mixed martial arts was going to be my only shot to do that. So almost right when I moved back out here, I had like 1 more year of PT school left. And a buddy of mine was doing jujitsu. He was actually a Krav Maga instructor at a jujitsu school out here, at an MMA school. And he was, you know, you got to come try it out. I wrestled with this guy. He's my best friend since like 2nd grade. And he's been trying to get me to do jujitsu for the longest time. And I was like, you know, I'm good. But I had stopped playing rugby as well. And there was a part of me that really missed that competition and missed like that complete physical exhaustion you get from a rugby game or rugby practice, where like every bit of you is spent and like you never sleep better than that in your life than you do after a game or after like a really hard practice. And I haven't had that in a couple of years. I noticed that my temper was starting to creep up a little bit. So I was like, all right, I need something to kind of to get this out. So I started taking some of the jiu-jitsu classes, and my wrestling background kind of like kicked in real fast. And my first night in a no-gi class, I was wiping the mat with like all the white belts and some of the blue belts. And guys like, this is bullshit. There's no way this is your first time. And I wasn't a great wrestler by any means. I was like a 500 career wrestler at best. You know, I didn't even wrestle in college. I went to like the club circuit for like a little bit, and I decided I didn't want to cut weight anymore. And I liked beer, which is why I found rugby. But so then I was like, all right, well, my best shot of working with these guys is if I actually stick with the jiu-jitsu thing and make it more ingrained in my physical therapy, in my strength and conditioning, because I can relate to what they have. If they're injured, they don't want to be told they have to sit in the sideline and not practice. How can I go to train and not continue to injure myself with whatever the injuries I have? So I understand what these positions are. I understand what butterfly guard is. I understand what open or close or side guard is. I understand what arm bars are. So I know what to do to tell them what to avoid, what positions to stay away from. So it makes me more relatable to them, so that I think they like to come to me because of all that. Now I'm under no illusions that I got where I'm at, or I treat the guys I do, or I work with the guys I do because of my own volition. I'm where I'm at because I kind of stepped in shit, as it were. My last clinical rotation for PT school was where I work now as a physical therapist at Bethpage Physical Therapy under Mike Camp. Mike Camp created all those avenues for me. Mike Camp made the connections with Keith Trimble from Belmore Kickboxing. He's good friends with him, good friends with Tony Ricci, who's the strength coach at Longo Weidmann. He treated Weidmann when he was in Hofstra College Wrestling. He treated Ryan LaFleur when he first started with UFC. And now Ryan LaFleur is the co-owner of Long Island MMA, which has 4 or 5 UFC fighters in it. So I have the guys I have because Mike Camp made those connections and then entrusted me to work with those guys because I'm really relatable to them because of my background in MMA or jiu-jitsu. So it's not because anything I did on my own. I was given the opportunity by someone who came before me and kind of paved the way. And, you know, Mike still works with a ton of all the guys. You know, I just happen to be lucky enough that I have a little more time on my schedule. He's a super busy dude. He teaches at Hofstra. He's got his kids are in high level sports. So I have more time and a bit more of a flexible schedule so I can fit them in, and there are weird times they're able to come in. So
Yeah, wow, that's a fantastic, concise story of your way in. Now, you mentioned there that you did 6 years kind of overseeing, which is interesting because I did about the same time at an S&C facility, um, also overseeing back in the UK. And the amount I learned in that 6 years completely blew my mind. Those 6 years, that's in the trenches, hands-on, almost apprenticeship style experience.
Hmm.
Would you say that is as important as sitting at the desk doing the theoretical CSCS,
More
or
so.
more important? Yeah.
More
Okay.
so, more so. I learned more in those 6 years. And so Gary Guerrero was the guy I used to work for. He was the head therapist there. He was a CSCS, strength coach himself. He was old school 5x5 Russian training style stuff. Like that was his thing. And it works, that's been shown by gazillions of people, that traditional 5x5 strength protocol is like a really good base level stuff. And prior to that, I'd never really been experienced. So, there's a standard bro knowledge stuff in the gym. It was all bodybuilding for me kind of coming up. So it was a grassroots but real world education and application as to how these things actually work, and as far as periodization is concerned and planning. And he was there kind of holding my hand, as it were, the entire time. So if I had questions, I was able to ask. No questions asked. If I screwed up, he let me know. If I was doing something wrong, he let me know. He was definitely he was not shy to let me know in front of everyone that I did something wrong. And you have no choice but to learn with something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow, what a mentor to have early on, and almost like a good environment. Sort of failure is permitted, but you'll be called up on it. You'll be held accountable. Yeah, just what a fantastic way. I think the apprenticeship model is really underrated, actually, for learning,
It should be
especially on
mandatory, because
right.
like I sat for that test with no real world experience as a coach or a trainer. I was a PE teacher, who happened to like working out, and I sat for that test, because I had the college level courses that qualify you for it. But now from there, I'm supposed to go out and I'm supposed to be a strength coach, like just because I have this designation at the end of my name. Like I had no experience, but the paper says I could. So I think it's essential. Like you cannot possibly get the same knowledge base from reading a textbook as like being in there, watching somebody put somebody through a program, adjusting as needed, adapting to injuries, time frames. There's nothing like you said, that real world experience. Like it's to just, it's baptism by fire, but you
Yeah,
have the chance to learn under somebody who's done it already, so you're not just like out there on your own trying to figure it out. Like you have somebody kind of guiding you. And I think you have to have that. It's mandatory for physical therapy. We have to do 4 clinical rotations before we can even graduate. So you're under it's basically an apprenticeship underneath someone who's a licensed physical therapist. You have to do it. I think it should be in strength as well. You should have to do some sort of apprenticeship. Like anything else, in the medical field, you have to do an apprenticeship. You have to do your residency as a doctor. You have to do your residency as a surgeon. Like, why? So why isn't that happen in the S&C world? I think it might be going that route. You see a lot more of that lately. A lot more people are offering apprenticeships, like Prestige did it out at now it's Exos. It used to be Athletes Performance out in Arizona. I know Phil DeRue down in Florida does a lot of apprenticeship stuff, and he's like the 4-time trainer of the year for MMA combat sports stuff, and
yeah,
he learned his stuff under Louis Simmons. So everybody, you're the sum of your parts from other people, right? Like you're the total sum of everybody you've ever met. So the more experience you can get with people that have been there before, I think just has the potential to make you a better coach. Now, does that mean you're going to be a better coach? Does it mean you're going to have no? But it helps.
yeah, absolutely. I can imagine in those 6 years as well. Not only were you given the hands-on knowledge of strength coaching, but you also got the experiential component of talking to people in a relatable fashion, which is very, I think, underrated and is getting more and more like now how important it is for a strength coach to be able to talk to someone, not just know what 5x5 is, not just know the technical cue of what a squat looks like, but how do you actually articulate that information in a way that's relatable, creates buy-in, creates some sort of culture where you get like a real positive, feedback loop going on, rather than just being the book nerd that came out of, university. I've seen them come in to do their kind of work experience. They can't talk to people.
No.
And then you're like, oh man, you've done like you could have done with those 6 years in the trenches, because then you would have actually been a relatable person. Instead, you've done 4 years on your masters. You've got all these letters after your name, and you're the most boring person in the room.
Yeah, exactly. And you see that actually in physical therapy too. A lot of the guys that I had gone to school with, were like, geniuses. They were super book smart, but when it came to the practical application of things, they would stutter on their words and they couldn't formulate a sentence, and they didn't know how to progress therapeutic exercise properly, or if they weren't told exactly I need to do step A, step B, step C, they couldn't do it. And I think that's a huge detriment to people. But again, that's where that experience that you have to go through in PT school that I think would carry over really well in S&C. Like you said too, like, all right, so you have the textbook knowledge of it, but like, can you demonstrate a sumo squat? Can you demonstrate a hang clean? Can you demonstrate a snatch? If you can't do it, how can you teach it? Right. I don't think for this sort of field, you can't, the old adage, if you can't do teach, those who can't do teach, those who can't teach gym, right? That was the old joke around here. But, if I don't think it parlays into strength and conditioning, right? If you're unable to do a certain movement, how are you going to teach to somebody? Because you can't demonstrate it if you can't do it. Right. And if you weren't kind of in those trenches to do those sort of things and had to be put through it at some point in time. And that's where maybe my bias comes through as an athlete. And again, so Gary Guerrero was my strength coach when I was a rugby player. So he would show me all these things. I would do them. He would create my programs to put on, now I weigh about 205 pounds. When I was playing, I was close to 240. So, and when I moved from flanker to hooker, I weighed like 215, 220. And at that Super League level, like most guys were like 230, 235, 240. So I was, grossly undersized for that position at the time. And I had to put some weight on. And Gary put together the program for me, and like we sat down together and created my next 6-week program. I had to put on weight, and so I have that experience, and then that also carried over into physical therapy. I had the ACL injury, so I've been on both sides of the table for both things. So it kind of gives me a bit of a leg up as far as how I can relate to people, because I've been there for everything.
Yeah, absolutely. That's massive, I think. So my experience with physios, it's been varied and many visits over the years. There's nothing worse than going to see a physio and you can tell that they're either out of shape, or they've never lifted a weight in their life, or they're not, they've never played a sport. They're maybe perhaps a theory head. Mm-hmm. And now they're telling you, your continuum back to real life, and you're just like, you don't understand me as an athlete, or as a sort of even a hobbyist. Like, you have no idea. You can't relate to me in the slightest. Like, if I don't go to jiu-jitsu, like there's a big carryover of like mental things that happen. Like, I have to go there, and yet you're telling me I've got to sit on the sofa for 3 months or whatever. There's nothing worse than that. So I can only imagine that once people get wind that you've got experience in all these areas, they're queuing up to see you, because they know you're not going to give them that answer of, just sit tight, buddy, and hang on. It's going to be like, okay, here's what you can do. Let's get after that.
Exactly. Let's work around it. What are you able to do to keep you going forward, to keep you going to jiu-jitsu, to keep you striking, whatever it is.
Yeah.
That's kind of like what we pride ourselves on at our clinic. We're predominantly a physical therapy clinic. Mike and I both happen to be strength coaches, so we do train guys, on the side or on top of our physical therapy day. But that's our thing, is like, I'll never tell you can't. You got to sit down and do nothing. It's all right, what can you do? And how can we create something for you to continue to do what you want without making your injury worse, or making sure you get the proper rest you need, or whatever it is.
Yeah, I love that approach. Now, it's I'd like to think that physio has come a long way from being plugged into the IMS machine and just left alone for 15 minutes, and then the physio fucks off and treats 15 other people in the cubicles, and they come back and go, right, your session's done. I like to think it's come a long way from that, even though I know it still goes on. I know there's clinics around here, they still do that, unfortunately. Now, I know it's on a case-by-case basis for you, John, but what does like a typical session with a combat sports athlete look like for you in terms of the physio side of things? I know it's probably case-by-case, but is there a sort of a pattern as to how you'll go about treating somebody?
Yeah, I think it's, without sounding too, it's kind of a blanket philosophy for everyone, whether it's, the soccer mom or the little kid or a combat sport athlete. But the way I approach most people is I facilitate that which is inhibited, now whether that's with an outside source, whether it's electrical stimulation, neuroelectrical stimulation, or re-education, whether it's, manual therapies, or I've inhibit that which is over facilitated. And then from there, I rely on a broad knowledge of corrective exercise to reinforce the new movement pattern, the new neurological pathways that we've created with whatever it is we were using, whether it's stim or manual techniques. But I take that approach with everyone. So the first, a typical, unfortunately, the way insurance payouts work is we only get about 15 to 20 minutes one-on-one with the patient as a therapist.
Right.
And from there, we utilize our trainers to take them through their exercise protocols, whatever it is they have to do. If we're given the opportunity, we partake in that as well. In an ideal world, I'd spend an hour one-on-one with each person, but the way the reimbursement rates go, especially here in New York, it's not really feasible. At best, you could do two per, at best case scenario, you see one every half hour. Realistically, it's one every 20 minutes. So in that 15, 20-minute time space, I'm trying to do as much as I can, like I said, to inhibit that which is over-facilitated, facilitate that which is inhibited, decrease pain, increase pain tolerance, tissue load, whatever they need, so that then their corrective exercise, they get more out of it for the next 30 minutes or so. With the higher level combat sports guys, we try to block off a little more time. More often than not, they're paying out of pocket. So if you do pay privately, you get more one-on-one time. You can pay for a half hour one-on-one, an hour one-on-one. We have a different tiered system at our clinic. So the guys that are the higher level ones will typically pay for more one-on-one time. So like I said, they'll get first, it's, let's say they've got some sort of a strain, it's calming the tissue down, restoring their range of motion first and foremost, because they need that more than anything else. And then from there, strengthening that which we need to, as far as if there's any kind of imbalances. We utilize, I do all sorts of manual techniques. It's, Graston, we do KT taping, cupping, I do joint mobilization, myself and Mike Camper, under the tutelage of this French osteopath, Guy Voyer. So we do a lot of fascial manipulation stuff. So you have the heretics out there that say that manual therapy is garbage. You have the other ones like us who are manual zealots to a degree, but because of my strength conditioning background, the strength work is essential. And to me, you can't just do the manual and send them on their way, because they'll feel good for a half a day and then they'll be right back in the office tomorrow. So they have to reinforce the new input, the new motor pattern, the new positioning with the right corrective exercises. So a session would be like that. It would be, especially with the higher level combat sports guys, it's usually about a half hour manual work, and then a couple corrective exercises, maybe some take home stuff for them to keep doing, to kind of keep that new pattern going for the next day or two until they come back in again.
Yeah.
And if we have the luxury of doing like a full strength session with them, depends on how long they're with us, then we'll do that.
Okay. Yeah. Wow. So they're lucky to have you guys, aren't they?
Yeah. It's good. And if we can't work with them, like I said, a lot of the guys that we work with, their strength coach is Tony Ricci. So we could tell them, okay, they're good to go for everything, or, lay off of XYZ, depending on what they got going on. And again, communication is huge. So
yeah, you can talk to their coaches.
Talk to their striking coaches. We work hand in hand with Ray Longo and the guys at Sarah Longo team. We work hand in hand with LaFleur and Greg Depot over at Lima, and Keith Trimble and his guys. So, hey, listen, Gregor's got this going on with his shoulder. Why don't you guys lay off upper body striking for a while, or don't let anybody sprawl on him? Okay, cool. Hey, this guy's got a problem with his knee. Stay away from, anything from the knees. You can do all stand-up work for the next couple of days. Okay, cool. Thanks. And then for the most part, a lot of them are very receptive to it, and they're like, oh, yeah, no problem. And we just suggest, we don't say, don't do this. It's just, it would be a good idea maybe if we laid off, groundwork for today. All right, cool. Thanks.
Amazing. Yeah, you give them a set of parameters that are functional and useful, where they can still go and do work. Yeah, that's such an important frame, that I think, that you frame it that way. Well, like you said, what you can do, not combine.
Yeah, not sit out, go sit in a hot tub all day. It's all right, go train, but, stay away from this today.
Yeah. There's lots of manual therapy modalities, let's say, that you mentioned there. Do you have a favorite, or one that you will always kind of employ, like more times than not? Because I imagine they change with fashion kind of trends as they come out, as they get more popular, as you see them more in the limelight. Like I would imagine they've probably been around for a while, like something like cupping. I would imagine it's quite an old technique.
That's millennia, but the reasoning behind it has changed. There's been more research to it, as far as, all right, are we bringing bad blood to the surface? No. If you have a circulation problem, we should probably get your kidneys checked. It's not really necessarily you have a tight muscle. It's more negative pressure. So if someone on a trigger point, if they can't stand the positive pressure from an elbow or a thumb, which is typically what's used to release a trigger point in manual therapy, then maybe negative pressure is a good option for them, which is what the cupping would do. I don't think I have one So the toolbox is vast, which is just good. I'm lucky. And it's very case based. My hands are number one. I use them. My hands are on everyone at all times. I'm always seeing how tissue's moving, how a joint feels. If there's too much swelling, can you feel if there's fluid or not? Can you feel a difference between different muscle fibers? And that comes with practice. Obviously when you're fresh out of school, you don't know what's the difference between skin and fascia or muscle. And even as you become, more experienced, it's still a lot of it is you're hoping you're on the right fiber, or you're hoping you're on the, from what in anatomy and everything else. But, that's where a lot of the manual therapy haters come in. They say, how do you know you're really on this? Or how do you know you're really on that? There's, 3 inches of tissue between this and that. And it comes from experience, I guess, is the best way to put it. That my best guess says I'm here. And my experience and what this does to this person says that I'm on that particular body part or muscle.
Yeah.
And then their response to that, this guy comes in with, an over-facilitated trap and an inhibited, infraspinatus. And they've got all this like diffuse kind of shoulder pain that's like non-specific. And, what's it coming? They think it's their, the insertional point of the supraspinatus, or it's the bicep tendonitis. And it turns out it's really referral pain from that pissed off, underused infraspinatus because the trap's taking over. So, okay, then what do we do with that? So it all depends. But I think my hands are the number one, that they kind of guide me what I'm going to do. And then it depends on their response. Some of these combat sport guys are super tough and they're like, crack away or pressure. And then you want to be careful with that because you obviously don't want to hurt anybody. And some of these guys, even though they get punched in the face for a living, they can't take the slightest amount of pressure. So you got to, all right, I got to back off a little bit, and maybe cupping's better for this guy, or maybe some easier grasping is a better option. Or we use this neural reeducation stimulant called the newbie. It's a fairly new thing that's out. DC current, which is old school stim stuff, but it's this guy that created, kind of revamped it. And it's a lot of like neural reeducation with this particular machine. Based on the wavelength you use and the hertz and the intensity, you can either facilitate an inhibited muscle, like a neural reeducation, or you can inhibit an over-facilitated muscle with biomechanical movement patterns, along with the placement of the pads after you do this whole mapping sequence. So we use that a lot in our practice with these guys too. So it's pretty vast. I don't think there's one specific thing that is like my go-to, just because it's different from person to person.
Absolutely. Did you do that thing that you just mentioned there with Ally Quinter?
Yes.
On your Instagram, I saw him wired up, and is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, that's the newbie there. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, cool. did that with okay, they've all been on it at some point in time. We knew it with Weidmann and Volante and Gregor Gillespie and a couple other ones. So it's.
So could you use it in the case of like infraspinatus and overactive trap? Then could you use it to fire up the infraspinatus and to tone down the trap?
Exactly. So it would have to be separate because you can't run 2 different units of the machine, one on the higher. So it's like the higher hertz is for inhibiting, like a 500 hertz setting would be for inhibiting a muscle because it's really causing that tetany in the muscle to kind of fatigue it out. Right. And then the lower hertz, like a 40 or 55 hertz, would be to kind of facilitate an underused or an unfacilitated muscle, or even one that's been atrophied from surgical intervention. So with I'm trying to think somebody we used it on. So with Gregor Gillespie before his last fight with Kevin Lee, we used it on his upper trap was just like cranking, and he was very rounded. He had a lot of diffuse shoulder pain. So we did some things with the upper trap to kind of calm it down, and then facilitated like his punching movements with the lower hertz on infraspinatus and deltoid to kind of like pull that together. Because the rotator cuff's main job is to prevent your deltoid from dislocating your shoulder when you raise your arm up. If you didn't have your rotator cuff, you dislocate your arm every time you brought your arm up with your shoulder. So their main job is as a force couple with the 4 of them is to pull the head back in the socket as you move. But if you're pulled forward from an over-facilitated pec and an overused trap, now that infraspinatus is now longer than it wants to be, so it's a lot weaker from all its movements. So it's not firing the way it should. So you can kind of like facilitate it more with punching motions or grabbing or rowing or actual external rotation, whatever it is you want to do with it. But
yeah, that's fascinating. That's very interesting. In my own experience, John, with my jiu-jitsu path and strength training, the goal of staying healthy enough to get on the mats day after day is not necessarily a straightforward road. I don't necessarily always have the ability to go and see a professional like yourself. I wish there were guys like you on every corner, but then I suppose they wouldn't be as special. And you're obviously involved in training yourself. You're not just a physiotherapist. You train and stuff yourself. What is the kind of stuff you can do, people can do as combat sports athletes, whether they're professional or serious hobbyists, to kind of keep themselves together day after day so they can keep training? You mentioned earlier there was a focus maybe with some of your fighters if they can get one day a week in their camp of prehab stuff.
Yeah.
What kind of approach do you kind of think about with regard to the prehab and just kind of keeping yourself together?
Again, it's kind of like, again, kind of case based. Depends on where someone's deficiencies would be.
Right, because you mentioned range of motion being restored to full range of motion is something that's a priority first. So
Yeah.
is it fair to say that a framework could be, have a look at where your range of motion perhaps is limited and maybe your prehabs are focused on
Yes.
restoring or something like that?
Exactly. And that's also, again, case based, right? So you have like your norms for range of motion for the shoulder, the knee, the hip, the ankle, whatever it is, but it's different from person to person. So like, yeah, okay, in a perfect model, 180 degrees of shoulder flexion is ideal, but like, for you, it might be 170 bilaterally. So now if 170 on your good arm is your norm, and you're at 140 or so on your left. All right, well, now you're inhibited on your opposite arm. So let's work on restoring you to 170 bilaterally. So there are ways of doing some self-assessment, and you can take kind of Gray Cook's method with the FMS and do a few of the movements there, see where you're lacking mobility, and then kind of go from that motion. Now, there's a gazillion ways you can do that. There's soft tissue mobilization or instrument-assisted soft tissue mobilization, like foam rolling, that kind of stuff. There's Dr. Andrea Spina's stuff, the FRCs, cars, pails, and rails. There's ways you can do that on your own. There's ways you can do that with a professional. There's just yoga in general would help with mobility. So there's a gazillion ways to do it. It all depends on your means, your time, your availability. But I think kind of finding where your deficits are first. But even before you get there, like something as simple, like I would even a total body circuit twice a week, strength training is ideal if you can get that in. Hit your knee dominant push, your knee dominant pull, your hip dominant push, your hip dominant pull, your upper body horizontal, vertical push pulls. And that's it. Work on your core, either whether it's. I'm not a big believer in sit-ups. I think they're useless.
Right, interesting.
I'm more about like the anti-rotation, anti-extension stuff for core stability. Now sit-ups, don't get me wrong, have their place. So like, let's say, but it's got to be functional, right? So other than being in full guard and reaching up for someone's neck or their lapel, when are you ever going to do more than one sit-up? So, but you might, to drill triangles, you got to do a lot of reverse sit-ups. So, okay, that's a more functional ab exercise for somebody in jiu-jitsu. Yeah. Instead of just sitting there and doing full body sit-ups or crunches all day long. So a twice a week total body circuit, and I would probably split it. I would do vertical pushes one, and push pulls on one, horizontal push pulls on the other. And I would do hip dominant movements on one and knee dominant movements on the other, as far as the lower extremity is concerned. So you're hitting everything. Yeah. And it's somewhere in there, if possible, swing and carry. Obviously, I'm a big fan of kettlebell swings or club bell swings, that kind of stuff. Club bells or mace is huge for shoulder mobility, and they're great for core stability. So you can kind of get more bang for your buck out of that. Yeah. Absolute bare minimum, kettlebell and a pull-up bar is all you need to get like a full kind of body circuit. Yeah. You could do, a plethora of things with a single kettlebell and a pull-up bar that kind of would hit everything you need as far as abs, push, pull, swing, and carry. Yeah. So, bare minimum, get yourself a moderately heavy kettlebell and just kind of go to town and just look up a million exercises you can do with it. Yeah.
Yeah, fantastic. I like that. You can strip it right down to 2 items, something to hang from, and something to pass around.
Something to hang from, something to throw around. It's really all you need.
Yeah, absolutely. It doesn't have to be rocket salad, does it? Nah. This is perhaps a wormhole of a question, John, but I'm going to chuck it at you anyway, because I think you'll be quite good at explaining it. How has your philosophy on coaching changed, let's say, in the last 15 years, more or less?
That is a good question.
It's
gotten more specialized in the last 5. Prior to the last 5, I worked with all different athletes. I had a football player, I had a track athlete, I had a triathlon, I had a triathlete, I had a couple different, which was fun because they were all very different programmable protocols. But Now I'm obviously more combat sports oriented, wrestlers and MMA fighters for the most part, and boxers, but combat sports guys. So my philosophy has gone. I used to be very big into the Olympic style lifts. That was my base: hang clean, snatch, deadlift. But I don't use them like I used to. They were like the base of my pyramid. Now they're kind of an ancillary. They're more part of my explosive part of my circuit for an athlete. So I'll do lighter versions like single arm dumbbell snatches. I'll do lighter hang cleans for time, just to work on explosivity for an athlete. Whereas I used to I'd do like 3x3s and just do cleans and snatches. So I'd spend a full hour with a client just doing cleans and snatches. That's it. So I think I've gotten more away from straight Oli lifts or straight strongman stuff and more like functional movement. I don't really like that term because functional is very varied. Yeah. But for my current athlete base, it's more functional, right? So it mimics the cage, it mimics time under tension for them, it mimics the different variabilities in body positioning they're going to utilize in a combat sport. So it's more functional for them. But function. That's why that word is so in vogue and so insta sexy now, because everyone's doing functional activities. But what is function? It depends on the individual, right? So if your job is to sit at a desk all day, you don't have a whole lot of function, do you? We just got to make sure that you're moving.
Yeah, absolutely. Is it fair to say, John, that the Olympic lifts, perhaps not the derivatives, but the Olympic lifts have quite a high coaching time needed?
Extremely high. They're a nuanced lift that have a lot of intricate variable parts to them, and it requires a lot of practice to get right. So if you take somebody who's never done it and you just throw them under the bar and expect them to do well and not get hurt, you're in for a rude awakening.
Right, which would make sense perhaps then maybe why your philosophy has shifted more, towards other things or away from the original OG Olympic lifts.
Yeah, because I don't have the time, a lot of these guys, to teach them properly. Yeah.
That's all right. Because you still get a benefit from, let's say you haven't got the time to teach a hang clean, you haven't got time to teach snatch from the floor. Could you still get the benefit with a trap bar jump, for example?
Sure.
A loaded
jump? You're getting that dead stop explosive movement. I'm a huge fan, and I utilize it with almost all my clients that I do strength work with, the single arm dumbbell snatch, because it doesn't have to be heavy. It's explosive. It's from the ground. It is it's technical, but not as technical as a barbell or a power clean or something like that. So if they've got any kind of shoulder injury or shoulder issue or mobility work, you can kind of work around a little bit with a dumbbell as opposed to the barbell. So it's more generalized for everyone, and it's easier to teach quickly. Just for me to, so I can get that explosive component out of that movement in my circuit for the guy or girl. I love the single arm dumbbell snatch currently. I go through phases where I love other things more, but right now that's my one of my go-tos. But but like a trap bar jump squat, or even a barbell jump squat, or doesn't have to be super loaded. You could put 65 pounds on there and just do 6 to 8 well techniqued jump squats, right? So, but even with those, most people do them incorrectly. They're jumping from their calves and their ankle instead of hip and knee. It's not a hip and knee dominant movement like it should be, right? Your powerhouse are your glutes, and if you're not using your glutes to explode, you're kind of missing the point of the exercise. So it still has to be taught, but it's a lot less nuanced than something as technical as a snatch or a clean.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And will you still use derivatives of the Ollie lifts with your more experienced athletes? Like
if they've done it before,
fulcrum blocks or something like that.
Yeah. If they've had, like, Volante played football at Hofstra, so he's done this sort of stuff before, so I can utilize a hang clean with them. Now he's got injuries that prevent him from doing it the way we would like, but he knows what he's doing. So we go over it real quick, we make a couple tweaks, and then we can add that into one of our circuits or something like that. But if they've never done it before, I'm not going to attempt to even start unless I've got 3 months. We got like a long time for the next fight, and they really want to work on putting on 5 pounds of muscle or whatever it is. Okay, now we'll take the time maybe to show one of them, but I'm not going to do 3.
Yeah.
Because I'll break them down into just the catch phase for a while, and I'll break them down in just the pull phase for a while, and I'll break them down from off the floor, the deadlifts. So I break them down when I have the time. I'll break them down a lot and kind of like periodize just that one lift.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Otherwise, it's quite a big chunk to take in one hit. Yeah, yeah. The coaching side of the ollie lifting is fascinating to me. Is God, you've got to know what the fuck you're doing, and you've got to have a lot of time. But yeah, if you can boil it down into those phases, as you say, I think that's a sensible way of doing it. You mentioned there as well carries. I'm quite interested in picking your brains on the carry side of things. Do you favour a certain kind of, you mentioned like dumbbell snatch, for example, for the sort of ollie lift variation that's coachable and time efficient. Do you have a carry that you kind of like to go to as a starting point for people?
Yeah, I like the suitcase carry because it works on your grip strength. It's unilateral. You have to utilize the opposing oblique side in order to stabilize the core and the spine, or the QL. You can break it down a million muscles if you want, but and it translates for the combat guys a little more for more of like that one-armed push-pull variance. If they're pulling on a wrist or a leg, you're not going to have two hands on something at all times for these guys. A lot of them, it's one hand doing the work and the other hand's throwing a punch or whatever it is. So I like to have unilateral offset things because it's more bang for your buck, right? The axial skeleton's under load. They're moving, so they're using their lower extremities. They're stabilizing their core to work on the balance of the weight itself. So you're getting a lot out of it instead of just holding a heavy trap bar and walking 55 yards, whatever it is. So I like the suitcase carry over most. If I had, our clinic doesn't have everything. We got a lot for a small little space that we have, but would I like, heavier like stones for carries? Sure. Would I like some of the cool strongman stuff? Yeah. Or a keg, those kind of things, but we don't have that. So
sure. You gotta try and be efficient with what.
So a suitcase carry with a heavy dumbbell kind of does the job.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I use it a lot with my clients. Just a single kettlebell and just getting them to understand the idea of using their brace in action. You mentioned that you're more on the you're an anti-hero when it comes to the sort of lateral flexions, extensions, and rotations, as opposed to doing, let's say, sit-ups for time.
Sure.
God forbid. What have you noted, like why the anti side of things, I suppose especially in the combat sport grappling world, why is it that the anti, like the bracing mechanics there, are so important and not just the old school, how many sit-ups can you do, man?
Yeah, so for me, the rectus abdominis, right? So all right, the word core gets thrown around a lot, right? Like everyone uses the word core, and I don't think everybody knows what it means, or anybody for the most part. For me, my personal definition of the core is everything from the bottom of your butt cheek to your sternum and everything in between, all the back muscles, all the internal stabilizers, all the glute muscles, that's all core for me. So the word core is variable, right? So most people think of the core, they think of the six-pack abs, they think of the rectus abdominis, but I think they're probably one of the most useless part of the core, other than looks. They don't really, other than causing trunk flexion, they don't do anything as far as stabilize the spine for the most part. They don't, they might help with an anterior tilt if you're at lower abdominals, your lower rectus are a little stronger, and you have really strong hip flexors. They might kind of like counterbalance that anterior tilt a little bit and prevent some back injuries, but they don't do much for stabilization. Whereas internal external obliques, rotators, multifidi, erectors, transverse abdominis do. And in a sport where there's so much variability in movement, I think bracing is a huge component to injury prevention as far as like your back is concerned. Can you withstand a 180-pound dude on your back while you're on all fours, or you're going stand up? And that's not going to happen from doing sit-ups. It's going to happen from loading and resisting flexion or extension or rotation. So the more for me I can incorporate that as part of the protocol, I think they get more out of it. Because a lot of these guys on their own in their striking classes or they're doing sit-ups, they're doing push-ups, they're doing stuff like that. So the rectus is getting work. Don't get me wrong. I don't mean by saying that the rectus is the most useless, that it shouldn't be worked, but I think there's a time and place for it. And with what little time I have, I get more bang for my buck out of the stability exercises and the bracing exercises than doing just straight, sit-ups, like you said. Now, you can even go so far as take a look at some of like those guys that squat 800-900 pounds, shredded. Like the core is as stable as it comes. That's just from bracing. Those guys aren't doing 1,000 sit-ups. Like that doesn't happen. But they're loading their spine and they're bracing for that much weight, and their core is just stable as hell. So that just kind of that's like a nail in the coffin for me as to why you don't need to do crunches and sit-ups to have a nice stable core. Like you just got to brace and load and resist movement. Yeah,
absolutely. It's funny when you get a beginner in, and maybe you've had this when you've had one of these superstar MMA athletes who has a training age of 0, and you get someone to do some basic breathing brace drills lying on their back, and they feel gassed because they're squeezing so hard and they're engaging stuff that they're not used to, and it's not a sit-up, it's not sit-ups for time, and yet just from getting them to brace properly, creating abdominal pressure and getting everything turned on, that alone can be a workout for someone that's never done it before.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, so you can really see its efficacy there. John, I'm not going to keep you too much longer, mate, because I know it's later where you are in New York, and it's probably time for another beer before listening to me harp on too much longer. But I just wanted to pick your brains. Just you're a successful chap. You have your physio stuff going on, your strength coach stuff going on, your MMA, coaching experience there. You're a husband. You're a father. How on earth do you fit it all into your week? How do you go about managing your time? I think something is really interesting with successful people. I've noticed this in my own life. People that come to jiu-jitsu and they're on time and they manage their time, they're in there, they're specific about what they want to get done. They don't fuck around. They come in, they warm up, they train, they go home. They're also really successful in other areas of their life. Mm-hmm. And you can see it in the microcosm of the jiu-jitsu class, for example. You strike me as someone like that. How do you manage it all, man? There's so much.
Yeah, that's actually a pretty fair question. And it's not the same all the time. I'm currently in a phase of my life where I'm foregoing my own personal training and my own personal to fit more people in, which may not be the healthiest of things. I tend to be a bit of a workaholic. I probably average 60 to 70 hours a week of work time. I'm fortunate enough that my kids are really young, so they're in bed early. So I see clients in my house in my garage gym at 7:30, 8 o'clock at night because my kids are in bed. So I don't like watching TV. I'm not really I don't like wasting time unless it's somewhat educational. Even like podcasts I listen to. I don't listen to the radio on the way to work. I listen to podcasts. I'm usually smoked by the time I get home. So I read when I can, as far as like journals are concerned, research articles, that kind of stuff. But I try to make sure that for myself, I get at least a day or two a week of jiu-jitsu in, a day or two a week of some sort of strength training. I spend time with my wife on the weekends at night. The kids are in bed. I try to make sure I give my kids plenty of time on the weekends when I'm with them. I still schedule clients at my house, but during my kids' nap time, so I'm missing out on anything with them. I'm with them when they're awake for the most part, unless I do something, and I'm a creature of my own worst enemy too. I don't hire anybody to do anything in my house either. I do all my own landscaping. I do all my own yard work. I take care of my cars. So I don't have a lot of time. But yeah, I don't, I'll watch a movie here or there with my wife. Maybe I give myself an hour of TV max at night. That's pretty much it. And that's not even every night. That's like 2-3 nights a week. I'd rather be working because I really love what I do, so it's not, I hate saying, if you love what you do, you don't work a day in your life, but like, I don't wake up on a Monday morning and I'm like, oh crap, I don't want to go in today. Like that hasn't happened for me for years. So I generally like what I do.
So important.
Yeah. But yeah, I try to balance it out. Sometimes the pendulum shifts too much in one way versus the other. I'm currently, like I said, I'm in that state where I'm foregoing my own health and well-being to see more people, because the opportunity presents itself. So I'm a firm believer in, if something's knocking on the door, like don't not answer it, like take it, like you have to. And I think that's the only reason why I am where I am is I make the time for some of these higher level athletes where I could leave the office at 4 o'clock and go to the gym and then get home, but this guy wanted to come in at 4:15, so I guess I'm not going to the gym today. I'm going to see that guy instead. So I make the time for them because it's not going to be that way forever. Eventually my name will go away and they'll forget about me, or they'll retire and the new guys coming up have no idea who I am and they're not going to be around anymore. So while I have the opportunity to work with them, I'm going to take it. Yeah,
absolutely. I love that approach, and it's a testament as to your success, I think, and and why you're where you are. You've got to where you are with that attitude. Just some closing thoughts, John, on sort of grappling and wrestling for children. I posted a video on the Move Mind page this week of you and your son training in what looked like in the garage, doing some wicked throws and to a brilliant metal soundtrack.
He picked that, by the way. That was his choice. Oh. I gave him the option of 4 different songs, and he wanted that one. So what
a legend! It's a man after my own heart already. What's the attraction as a parent, as a father, for getting your children into something like sort of wrestling, jiu-jitsu, rough and tumble kind of grappling, I suppose, is a better term?
The reasons are different for each one of my children. So I roughhouse with both of my kids. I have a son and I have a daughter. My daughter's 5 and my son is 3. I grew up wanting to wrestle and run around all the time. And even though I spent my younger years kind of like, the roly-poly kid who got picked on, wrestling gave me the base and the self-confidence to kind of come out of that and to realize, my potential, et cetera, and taught me humility, and all the willpower I have and the work ethic came from wrestling for me. So for my son, it is essential that he does that as well. Before he was even born, I said, I'm going to make my son wrestle until 8th grade, from the second he's able to until 8th grade, because I want him to know what it's like to be accountable, to be humbled by somebody who's better than him, to be respectful when he loses, and then to test himself to a point to where wrestling tends to be, it's a grueling sport. I can't even tell you how many times I puked at practice, or I puked after a match, or and that happened a couple times in rugby too, but not as much, not to the extent wrestling did as a kid. I just think I learned, but what made me a decent rugby player was my wrestling background. It was just everything I got from wrestling. So for my son, it's, teach him to be a man, teach him how to use his body to defend himself, to, make himself strong, but also to be humble and to, learn humility, and you get some morality out of wrestling, which is huge. Everyone on the mat, doesn't matter color, skin, ethnicity, it's wrestling. And I don't care what your religious space is, we're going to wrestle. That's it. Like it's me and you one-on-one, and one of us is winning, one of us is losing. That's it. And I think that's huge for my son, to help him to become a good man. For my daughter, and he just shows an interest. So for him, it's like, since he was able to walk, he wanted to wrestle daddy and fight, and he likes the superheroes and wants to fight the bad guys. And so if I can channel that into, a productive and constructive means, and maybe he'll be a great wrestler and be a state champion, and maybe an MMA and UFC champion one day, but if he has that good wrestling background, that's a good start for him. And for my daughter, I think it's huge for the girls to roughhouse with daddy too, to understand what roughhousing is, the difference between that and somebody being super mean, or somebody attacking them, or something that's more nefarious than they may think it's more nefarious than it is. And then also to be comfortable with that close proximity with another person, so that in the event that does happen later in life, they know what to do a little bit. So like my daughter, she's a little young still, but I do want her to take some jujitsu. I think it's huge for self-defense. I think for anybody, jiu-jitsu is probably the most applicable to real life. Most fights in a bar end up on the ground within seconds. Most fights in the street end up on the ground within seconds. Very rarely people standing there with their dukes up. So it's the most realistic combat style there is. And I think for girls, and my daughter, I want her to be able to defend herself in the event she finds herself in a situation where someone's on top of her, or someone's pinning her down, or someone's got her cornered, and I want her to be comfortable and know a couple things to defend herself. So for her, it's just, and it's also, that rough play, because it's, for them, it's just play. There's no real competition now. There's no real, but it's they're at an early age, they're using their body in ways that normally wouldn't. It's pushing and pulling and accepting weight and giving weight and spinning and things that they wouldn't get on the playground. So I think it's huge for development. And I think some kids miss that if their dads don't roughhouse with them, and they don't, there's the, toss the ball in the backyard thing. But I think the roughhousing, that's such a primal, it's a kids have done with their fathers for eons. So I think that when we're losing that in the culture today, with, everybody's so afraid of toxic masculinity and everything, that I think it's kind of gone to the wayside. And I think that's a shame, honestly.
Agreed. Yeah, I think it teaches a lot more than meets the eye, socially and physically, and there's a lot going on there than just rough and tumble. I would completely agree. I think it's a fantastic attitude. I hope if parents are listening to this, they pay attention to that last statement from you. Absolutely. And I guess lastly, Chris Weidman and his poor lad, his horrific injury, and the irony of that happening to him after what Anderson Silva did. Where does someone like Chris go from there? Like, now he's had the surgery or whatever, he's had the plate put in his leg. I mean, you understand the pathway and the continuum back to health better than anyone. So he's had his surgery. What would something like that look like, to maybe not even getting back to a competitive level, but even just to a kind of
just daily living
level? Because that was horrific.
Yeah, I mean, because he ended up having the injury to the soft tissue as well. So the difference between his and Anderson Silva's was, Silva kicked and immediately fell backward and didn't put weight back on the leg. Like, he knew he did it, and he went down and he knew it happened. Chris had no idea until he put his leg down and he put the bone through the back of his muscle. So the injury is significantly different, even though eerily similar. And, it's only happened 3 times in the UFC, and 2 of them were with Chris Weidman's involvement, which is just so strange. But he's got a long road ahead of him. But I think we were talking about earlier before we kind of came on. He's one of the most resilient, dedicated, hardworking people I've met. And if anybody can come back from this, it's him. But he does have a long road. 6 months before he's doing normal daily activities without significant impediment. He's going to be on crutches for 8 to 12 weeks. He'll be in a soft cast for another 6 or so. And then it's a lot of physical therapy and range of motion. And I don't know, he put the x-rays up on Instagram. He's got some screws through both the tib and fib, which is going to restrict some motion at both his knee and the ankle. So that's going to be addressed. I don't know if they're going to take the screws out or not. It all depends on the surgeon and how bad it was when they went in there. But he's got a long road. It took Silva 13 months to get back into fighting. So, and I don't think his injury was as extensive as Chris's is. And I forget the age at which it happened to Silva, so I don't know if that plays a role or not, or prior injuries. Chris has had his fair share of injuries over the years, so like I said, if anybody can do it, it'll be him. But realistically, I think he made mention on his Instagram post that they told him 6 to 12 months. I think they were kind of blanketing the overall recovery for him to not freak him out at first. But yeah, like I said, I think it's 6 months before he's feeling somewhat normal in daily living activities, up to a year before he's really kind of feeling okay to train properly, and then longer to actually get some sort of a camp in. So we're looking at a while before we see him in the ring again. But do I think he'll be there? Yeah. He's already said he plans on it, and I don't doubt it one bit.
Wow, that's fantastic. Tip of the cap to him. I wish him all the best on his recovery. Dr. Jon, if people want to get hold of you, Instagram, your clinic, website, stuff like that, how can they get in touch?
The website for the clinic is www.strengthandrehab.com. That is for Bethpage Physical Therapy. We are a outpatient orthopedic clinic in Long Island. We're kind of on the border of Nassau and Suffolk County, so we're pretty central. Anybody from the Suffolk County area come to us pretty easily. We have a lot of people coming from other states like New Jersey and Connecticut to come see myself or Dr. Camp, a couple of our guys at the office. The Instagram is my personal email is Jon@strengthandrehab. It's JON@strengthandrehab.com. If they wanted to inquire about potentially coming in for either S&C stuff or evaluations, that sort of thing. My particular Instagram is Dr.Amato_P. So it's Dr.Amato_PT. So either way, you could either shoot me an email, find me on Instagram, check us out on the website. There's a lot of good, there's 5 of us full-time therapists that work there. Everyone's got their own little niche, but we're a good cohesive unit. We all work together pretty well. Mike and I are the 2 main, the strength guys there, but the other guys are really good manual therapists as well. So, we work, it's a good environment, and we see a mix of, Grandma Gertrude with a hip replacement to Chris Weidman, and, those guys come in, and so it's a good, healthy mix. And it's a good, everybody that comes in, is pretty active and wants to get back to their normal activity. So it's a pretty lively clinic, and it's busy. There are times in the middle of the day when there's all 5 of us on, and we have 2 to 3 patients there for the hour. So it's a busy place.
Yeah, I think you guys are setting the standard, mate, in terms of this hybrid kind of model and pulling in different, professions, and especially the combat sports world and S&C. I think you're really setting the standard of how physios should go about their treatment and assessment and stuff like that. So props to you. Jon, thanks so much for coming on the show, mate. This has been fantastic. I've been loving picking your brains, mate.
Yeah, it was good.
Really cool. And I'd love to get you back on soon, and maybe even go deeper down some of the strength kind of wormholes, because that's what I love talking about the most.
Sure. Yeah, I'd be happy to.
Cool. All right, brother. Thank you so much.
Cool.
This episode of the Move Mind podcast was brought to you by CBD Mountain, for sport and fitness CBD. Head over to cbdmountain.com for a range of soft gels, skin balms, oils and vapes, and purchase online and have the premium quality CBD delivered directly to your door. cbdmountain.com.